Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, the climate guy setting the record straight about climate. This video is part 2 of my series on the newly released National Climate Assessment. It's titled Unambiguous Fraud in the National Climate Assessment. This video is focused on page 13, which is titled Global and U.S. Temperatures Continue to Rise. The text reads, "The global long-term and unambiguous warming trend has continued in recent years." And at the bottom of the page is this bright red temperature graph and this bright red temperature map. Let's take a closer look at those. They look pretty scary with all that bright red. It looks like the planet is burning up from pole to pole. The graph shows that the Earth was pretty cool from about 1880 to about 1980, and then thanks to your SUV, the planet suddenly started burning up really fast. And look at the resolution in that map. Look how much South America is heated up, and Africa, and Asia. It looks really serious. But there's just one minor problem with this. Their data is fake. This map shows where all of the NOAA thermometers with daily temperature data were located in the year 1880. As you can see, outside of the United States, southern Canada, western Europe, and southeast Australia, they had almost no data for the entire planet. None in South America, 1 or 2 stations in Africa, none in Russia, none in Asia. So you might ask, how did they calculate the global temperature in 1880 when they didn't have daily temperature readings for most of the globe? That's a really good question. Well, maybe it got better by the year 1900. Let's take a look at that. 1900's a little better. Now they have some stations in Russia, a few in Asia, still none in South America, only 1 or 2 in Africa, and a little bit more in Australia. Of course, there were no stations in Antarctica and only 1 or 2 in Greenland. So how do they calculate the global temperature when they're lacking any daily temperature data for entire continents? Okay, so maybe the situation got better by 1920. Let's have a look at that. A few more stations in Russia and a few more in Australia, and they finally got 1 station in South America. This was at Buenos Aires, which is a notorious urban heat island. So the only station in South America in 1920 shows a huge warming trend over the last century, but another station right across the bay from them in Uruguay shows a cooling trend. If we go back and look at the National Climate Assessment trend map for South America, they show a huge amount of warming, but they didn't actually have any data, and the one station they did have was severely compromised by urban heat island effects. This map is just straight up fraud, as is the temperature graph to its left. They didn't have enough data back in this time frame to determine a global temperature. It's all fake news. Now let's push ahead to 1940. As you can see, the United States and southern Canada had lots of stations, still almost none in South America, just a handful in northern Africa, really none in southern Africa, none in Saudi Arabia, 1 in India. The global climate record is a joke. They don't actually have any legitimate data. If you don't have daily temperature data for a location, you don't have a legitimate temperature record. The only thing that a thermometer knows how to read is the temperature at one moment in time, and that's the daily temperature record. Now let's fast forward to 2017 and look at how NOAA is handling the current temperature data. NOAA still has very poor coverage in Africa and South America, which is represented by the gray, and yet they're reporting record heat in areas where they have no thermometer data. I don't know how much worse science can get than this. They have very little data in Africa, very little data in South America, very little data in Greenland, very little data in Antarctica, very little data in northern Canada. And despite the lack of data, they're reporting record warmth. I'm not sure what they're doing, but whatever it is, it's not science. So we've seen that the land data is fake, and as it turns out, the ocean data is fake too. This ClimateGate email from Phil Jones spilled the beans. For much of the southern hemisphere between 40 and 60 south, the normals are mostly made up as there is very little ship data there. They're simply making up the ocean data. Both the land data and the ocean data is fake. They have no idea what the global temperature was in the year 1900. They simply don't have enough data to determine that. But there is one location on the planet that has a very good long-term daily temperature record, and that's the United States of America. If we look at the actual NOAA measured daily temperature data for the United States, it shows no warming over the past century, none at all. In fact, the measured temperature data shows that the warmest decade was actually back in the 1930s. This graph was NASA's U.S. temperature graph, which was published in the year 1999, before they started really tampering with temperature data. And it showed the same thing, that the 1930s was the warmest decade, and then it cooled through the end of the century. Now I'm going to switch to an animation which shows how NASA has altered their U.S. temperature data since 1999. Where NASA used to show cooling, now they show warming. What they did was they cooled the past and warmed up the present to create a fake warming trend which doesn't exist in the raw data. So let's summarize where we're at this point. The global temperatures are fake, and the U.S. temperatures have been altered to turn a cooling trend into a warming trend. The whole global warming thing is based on completely fake data. Summer maximum temperatures in the United States have plummeted over the last century. Back in the 1930s, 90-degree days were very common, but since about 1960, 90-degree days have become much less common in the U.S. Also note how the area of heat waves has diminished. In the year 1931, 97% of the U.S. reached 90 degrees sometime during the year, but since then it's dropped down closer to 90%. So we're steadily reducing the area of the United States which gets really hot. Now I'm going to show you how NOAA is tampering with the U.S. temperature data in this hockey stick. NOAA gets rid of the hot 1950s and 1930s by massively cooling the temperature data by more than 1 degree, and they make the present warmer by increasing the temperature data. These scientists expect to see CO2-induced warming in the U.S. temperature record. That's not present in the data, so they alter the data to match their theory. In fact, they precisely alter the data to match their theory. On the y-axis is the adjustment they're making to the temperature data, or as I would call it, data tampering, and on the x-axis is carbon dioxide. So you can see as carbon dioxide increases, they're linearly increasing their adjustments. This is completely fake junk science, quite possibly the worst science ever done. NOAA used to admit that the United States wasn't warming. This article in the New York Times in 1989 was titled, U.S. Data Since 1895 Failed to Show Warming Trend. After examining climate data extending back nearly 100 years, a team of government scientists has concluded there's been no significant change in average temperatures or rainfall in the United States over that entire period. Well, this fact wrecked their global warming scam and wrecked their funding, so they just changed the data. This graph shows exactly how much NOAA is altering the U.S. temperature data. The blue line is their measured temperature data, and the red line is what they report to the public. The global warming trend reported in the United States is completely fake. And if you remember back, the United States is the only location on Earth that has really good daily temperature data. So what is global warming based on? It's based on fake data, it's based on tampered data. Now let's look at how NASA has tampered with the global temperature record. This graph shows their 1981 version of the global temperature record in black, their 2001 version in red, and their current version in blue. As you can see, they're doing the same thing they did to the U.S. temperature record. They're cooling the past and warming the present. They're doing this to match their theory, and specifically they're doing it to increase their funding. It's not science, it's fraud. And this animation shows how they've doubled 1880 to 2000 warming since the year 2001 simply by pure old-fashioned data tampering. The National Climate Assessment is fraudulent interpretations of fraudulent temperature data gathered by fake scientists. Congress needs to shut this scam down. Much of climate science and much of public policy is based on this fake data. It's imperative that we stop it. Visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been playing back the curtain on junk science for a long time.